Alright, today we're doing disc brakes on a 98 Jaguar XJR. Got the vehicle up in the air here using the factory jack. And I found for your jack stand the best place is there's a frame rail, as you can see back here. And I just put my jack stand underneath there. I don't know if you can see that. See it underneath there. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is pop these dust caps off the back here and see what the bolts are like underneath them. Alright, these are Allen wrenches. They're the 7mm size. I'm going to use a ratchet and a Allen head to get it off. Alright, here are the two caliper slides. Kind of pins with the Allen keys at the back. And after you get those off, the next thing you want to take off is this springy metal piece that holds the caliper on. And just pry right at the back here with a flat-bladed screwdriver, kind of just like right there, and you'll get it off. The next thing I've got to do is, I believe there's enough of a lip on, there's a lip here on the rotor, and it's preventing the caliper from coming off when I just pull it off. Let me show you around the back, just so you know what it looks like. And there shouldn't be anything holding the caliper on, so I think I've just got to pry it off. I think it's just the lip of the rotor. So I'm going to do that now. I pried the caliper up and have it halfway off the pads. You can see what's happening. It's coming up and the pads are staying. And the pad in the back is staying as well. So I'm going to pry it the rest of the way off of there, and my pad should try to almost fall out of there. I guess I'll try to catch them when my caliper comes off. Alright, so I got the caliper off, and I just bent it around here and kind of sat it on top of the upper A-arm, upper control arm. And pads on this thing look pretty decent. So the symptoms of this car and why I'm doing the brake job is because I got a kind of a pulse in the steering wheel, or a wobble in the steering wheel, and I thought I had bent rotors. So I'm looking at this now, and yes, the rotors may be bent. I don't have a dial caliper, so I can't check for run out here. But I will have them checked for a run out at the auto parts store. But look at this. Let's see if I can get my light here. Look at this. When I I'm wondering if I need a wheel bearing or if my rotors are warped at this point, or maybe both. Now, to do the wheel bearings, I don't know how those come off. I guess it's some kind of a special attachment method. I'll have to research it. But let me see if I can get the drum off. I should be able to just get a hammer, put two lug nuts on here and here, and get a hammer and smack it here, and should be able to shock it off. It should come off. So let me try that. Before I can take the rotor off, I have to take this caliper bracket off. You can see it's trapping the rotor. And around here, it's a 17mm socket you need to put on here, on these two bolts, to get those off. And I'm going to use either a ratchet or a breaker bar. Alright, I got my rotor off. The method of hitting it in between the lugs worked pretty good. Make sure you put your lug nuts on to protect your threads. And then I had to work it back and forth a little bit to get it over this ridge here. It was kind of stuck on there, but I had already got it off the spindle, just it was stuck on the hub. Anyway, so I still have this play problem here. I don't know if you can hear that. So I'm thinking it's time to do a wheel bearing, so I'm going to look into that. The whole front of this hub has no threads or anything. Actually, the entire thing is hollow. Let's see that. And the only thing in the back, the nut is on the back. Looks like that. It's got a spring clip with a pin that goes through it that prevents it from backing off. It's right in the middle of your screen right now. And it looks like I need a special socket to take off this, to take this wheel bearing out. So I'm going to look for a socket that fits a nut the shape of that, which is really crazy. So you need to get the bolts out of the dust shield. And if you try to put a normal socket in here with a ratchet on it, your ratchet will run into the hub and it'll actually get stuck in here. So what you gotta do is you gotta get one of these. It's a little nut on an extension. Hold on here. Get this out of here for you. Alright, here's what that looks like. It's a nut with a that'll go into the back of the socket. So you put your nut on the back of your socket, like here, and then you put a wrench on it. So that will go in here like this. Then you put your wrench on it and turn it. And it'll just give you enough clearance to get them out. This tie rod end, when you would turn it, it would just spin and spin and spin. So what I had to do is get a floor jack and put a little pressure underneath the bottom of it, like that, to hold it up and push it into the spindle. And then I used a any kind of air impact, or this is an electric impact. Probably a wrench would start working at that point too, but I had to do that. It just spun on me. Okay, to compress our springs, we're going to use this ATD Master Spring Compressor Kit. Alright, this supports both struts and normal springs. We're going to see if we can use the normal spring compressors first on the inside of the spring, since our shock is not on the inside. Alright, I got one side done. You can't use a spring compressor like this on the XJRs, or probably any of the XJ8s, because this piece is too big to get inside the coils of the spring. And also, these bolts will not fit up inside the spring or in the hole in the bottom of the lower control arm. So if you've got a setup like this, it's basically out for compressing the spring, except you could use the McPherson compressors on the outside of the spring. Would probably work if you don't run into the wheel well with it, if your bolts aren't too long. I ended up not using any of this. I supported the bottom control arm with the jack and let it down, and the shock controls the movement. Granted, in the perfect world, you'd probably want to buy the Jaguar spring compressor tool. That's the special tool that they sell for the car. Or while you have this off, leave a floor jack underneath it, compressing the springs so you don't have a lot of load on your shock. I'll probably do that if I leave this overnight. So I'll show you how I did the other side now. When you're doing this job, especially when using the puller and the spindle can fall on the floor, make sure you wear shoes, make sure you wear some kind of gloves to protect your hands, and a face shield or some safety glasses. Alright, get your floor jack, and with your car's still on your jack and your jack stand. This isn't quite touching, it's actually on the factory jack on this side. Jack up your lower control arm a little bit just to get a little pressure off of the upper control arm. And then we're going to break our nuts loose on our upper and lower control arms. You're going to want to remove the nuts on the upper and lower control arm, just right there and down here. I broke both of these loose with my breaker bar and a 1/2 inch to 3/8 adapter to an 18. Okay, now that you've got your bolts off or nuts off of there, go ahead and with your mini sledge hit the top and the lower knuckles to kind of shock them. The shock of you hitting here pretty hard. Don't hit on the threads, don't hit on the nut, don't hit up, hit sideways on the steering knuckle, and that'll vibrate it and make it come loose. I'm going to do that before I use my special tool to get that off of there, before I use this, just to try to free it up a little bit. You need this special tool for this job. This is made by a few different companies and rebranded, but this model is the Gear Wrench 3916D. And this will pop your upper and lower control arm ball joints off. Alright, now we've got our ball joint removal tool here, and I'm just putting pressure on it with a wrench there. When you slide this tool on, try to make sure that you don't cut up your boot that protects your ball joint. Try to slide it underneath the boot so that you don't crush or cut your boot. Alright, with a small explosion we got our upper ball joint off here, and now we've got our hub is still connected to the spindle that's connected to the lower ball joint, and we're going to use the same tool, but to get that tool in there we're going to have to move our jack out of the way, so we'll kind of step back and slowly release tension on the spring until it bottoms out on the shock travel. Now, disclaimer is that Jaguar says you're supposed to use the by their special tool and keep the spring compressed throughout this whole process, so this is not the recommended way you do this, but it's the way I'm going to do it. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, here's the tool installed in the lower control arm. Make sure you don't crush your boot. Kind of push your boot up a little bit so you don't slice it with this tool. And just crank on this tool. So there's tools that Jaguar will sell you that are actually dies, and they allow you to press the old wheel bearing out and the new wheel bearing in. I don't have that, so I'm going to take this to a local Jaguar specialist or a machine shop to have them do that. But if you have those specialty tools, mainly this nut, I think, the socket for this nut, you can get into here and maybe use sockets or something else. I don't know. We got our spindles back from the machine shop here, and the important thing with these is that to check them once you get back, make sure that there's no side-to-side rock in them or anything like we had before with our bad bearings. Apparently these were really difficult to press. I took them to someone who had a Jaguar shop here locally, and they said that it's very difficult to press them, and usually if you don't have the right tools and if you haven't done it before, it's really easy to wreck your first bearing that you do. We're going to get these and attach them back to our car with the upper and lower control arms. I'll show you that next. When reinstalling your spindle, you want to get a towel and you want to really clean off these where the spindle mounts on these ball joints. Make sure that there's not any grit or debris in here, because this is a press fit seal, and if you have any grit on these, it'll cause that seal not to be quite as good, and it won't actually lock your spindle on there. So you want to clean both of your ends where you both of the male ends and both of the female ends for these before you put it back together. Really good. Okay, now that we've got our spindles cleaned up, we're gonna attach the spindle back to the car. We're gonna connect the lower control arm first, and you have to make sure that you get your dust shield little tabs to line up as well here. Through there. And get our bottom nut on here. Alright. We're good. Alright, now we'll attach our top ball joint, control arm joint, and push that down there. And just get these on hand tight for right now. We're going to come back and put a torque wrench on these later. Alright, we're on there. Okay, I just squirted a little bit of this on the threads. If you're not familiar with Loctite, get the blue. The red is for things that you never want to come off again, or you've got to use heat to loosen. This just is it's like a glue, and it prevents nuts from backing off. So I squared this a little bit of this on both threads. So the bottom control arm ball joint would just keep spinning and spinning on me when I tried to put it on. So what I did is I got my floor jack, and I'm putting pressure on the spindle, pushing it up, and then I was finally able to get the lower ball joint to stop spinning when I was putting the nut on that. So the top one is still spinning. I haven't figured that out yet, but I'm going to go ahead and torque this one while I'm here. Okay, both the top and the bottom ball joints are supposed to be torqued to 60 to 80 Newton meters. So I've got my torque wrench here set to 80 Newton meters. I'm going to torque it down. Alright, to tighten your upper ball joint that was just spinning on you, what you're going to want to do is get a really huge breaker bar pry bar, and you're going to want to stick it in the spring and then push down as hard as you can, really hard, on this upper control arm. And then while you're doing that, get a ratchet and tighten up your nut, and it'll stop spinning on you. Now I'll torque this one. I finally got this upper ball joint torqued down to 80 Newton meters. I had to do two things to do that. I used my pry bar actually it was in this side like this, and I also used the floor jack to move the whole spindle and assembly closer to the upper control arm, so then I didn't have to push down quite as hard with the pry bar, and then I was finally able to torque it. So next is putting in our next is connecting our tie rod end. So once again, we'll want to clean both of our surfaces, and push this here. We'll want to do our same blue Loctite procedure here. Just put a few drops on the threads. And we'll want to tighten this up with a ratchet and then do a final torque. Is a 19 millimeter, and we need to torque it down to 85 Newton meters. Okay, that one was pretty uneventful. If it would have spun, I would have put my jack underneath the tie rod end right here underneath the ball joint and pushed up just ever so slightly to get that to quit spinning. We're going to put our dust shield back on here. It's almost already on. Just needs 3 small screws, as you see there. One in the top and 2 in the bottom corners. And these are torqued. Oops. So I'm going to get these finger tied, and then I'm going to go get my torque spit and look up the torque spec for these. I'll keep our dust shield from rattling. The torque for these backing plate or dust shield is 10 Newton meters of torque for these. But I just got them snug and put blue Loctite on them because you really can't fit a torque wrench in here. I put a little blue Loctite on my wheel speed sensor and on the bolt on it. I don't know if you can see it there. Yeah, it's bolt. And this is also 10 Newton meters, which is just kind of snug. Okay, we put our new rotor back on. It's pretty easy. It just slides on and off. Make sure it sits nice and flush. You can kind of clean behind the rotor to make sure it sits nice and flush. Now we're going to put our caliper mounting bracket on with these two big bolts. Alright, now we get to look at torque specs for these. Alright, we're going to torque both of these caliper carrier bolts to 140 Newton meters. And this is a 17. Alright, we're going to take our brake fluid reservoir cap off and kind of watch the fluid level as we compress our brake caliper to make sure that this doesn't overflow. We're going to use a brake caliper compressor tool to push this piston back in to the brake caliper. And we're going to do this because we have to push this back in so that our new thicker pads will have room to fit so that we can slide this on over our disc. I got away with compressing one of the brake calipers without my fluid level overflowing in my master cylinder. But to compress both of them at the same time, it'll overflow. So I've had to use I used a glass bowl and a metal cooking spoon to take some of the brake fluid out, and then I'll add it back in at the end of the job when I have room and press the brake pedal again. But it'll overflow if you compress both of them at the same time. Now it's time for pads. I got these pads. They're called Akebono. It's a Japanese company, but now they make all their brake pads in the United States. As you see there, this is EUR394A brake pads for a 98 Jaguar XJR. And here are the pads. They come, they look like pretty nice pads. They're carbon ceramic. And I did a test fit already to make sure that they fit in the caliper and they're not too thick and they go on the rotor. What I've done now is I've applied, they give you some Moly lube that you need to apply to the backing plates of these. Just a very light coating. And I also applied a very light coating just at the points of contact on the caliper. So let's put these on. Get these springs and make sure that the spring goes inside the piston. This one's good. This one doesn't have a spring, it just sets in here. Now we can move our caliper. Hold your brake pads in, move your caliper down, back over your caliper bracket. Okay. Now we have these two pins that are going to go in the caliper is going to float on. The caliper only pushes from one side, so you need these pins to be very very slick and the caliper to move on them very easily. So we need to clean these off and apply a thin layer of this caliper grease, caliper pin grease. Now, don't use normal grease for this because it'll actually, I guess, boil and rust, and your pins will seize inside your calipers. So you need to use a special product for this. You can use any brand, but it's synthetic caliper grease, or any kind of caliper grease that will not seize up your brake calipers. Okay, it's kind of a blue color here. Kind of put a thin coating on them. Okay. There we go. Okay. I'm going to have to get an Allen wrench to turn those in, but the process is the same for the next one. Just thin coat of grease. It's probably a little too much. Okay. And we'll put this one in. There we go. All right, now for our Allen key. The caliper guide pins, we want to torque to 30 Newton meters. This is a 7mm socket here. Allen key head. Double check them. Always like to double check things, especially on the brakes. All right, we're ready to put our wheel back on. We're all together. One more step, I almost forgot. This little spring piece needs to go on. And if anybody knows a better way to put these on, let me know. But what I do is I get one started, and then you pull. Let's see, how did I do this? And you pull that down like that. So one side's in. Now I've got to get the other side in. So I get this side started. And then I keep pressure on it I get like a little pick tool like this. I keep pressure on it, and I pull this other side down like that over into the position where it's supposed to be. And then I get a little ball peen hammer and just make sure that they're all the way in here. I'm trying to hit the spring part, not the caliper. Okay. Now I push my spring part in. Okay, it's pretty much in there now. All right, now we're ready for the wheel, for real this time. You can put a little anti-seize on your wheel lug studs. You don't have to do this step, but this is something I like to do just so that your lug nuts don't kind of rust onto your lug nut studs. Just a tiny bit of this stuff. You don't have to go crazy or anything. Then we'll get our wheel, throw it on here. Oh, we're too low to get the wheel on. We're gonna have to jack the car up, at least on this side. We're gonna torque our lug nuts to 100 Newton meters, or if you're in the colonies, that's 75 foot-pounds. We want to do this in a star pattern. You know what? I need an extension. Go. Yeah, star pattern. Make sure to do a star pattern, otherwise your wheel could fall off. I got these as tight as I could get them while the car was still jacked up, but you can't really torque them down because they'll just rotate unless you have a helper that'll step on the brake for you. Just skip one every time. Okay. Now I've got to get this extra brake fluid back in the car. I'm going to get in the car and press on the brake pedal. Actually, I'm going to put my brake cap on here first so that it doesn't shoot everywhere when I hit the brake pedal. And I'm going to pump the brakes a few times to try to get some fluid back down into the calipers. Get my pedal to firm up. Okay, that should be good. I've got a much firmer pedal than I had. Let's see if our fluid level went down a little bit. A little bit, not a lot. but enough. Now be careful with this brake fluid. It's really nasty stuff, and if you get on your paint, it can take the paint of your car right off. So make sure to try not get it on anything, and if you do, get it off immediately. Just get your cap snug. It doesn't have to be ridiculously tight.